Chapter 161. The Little Details. Dominic and Lucy went through the numbers for the proposal again and then started in on the training and equipping a guard force portion of the proposal. Technically, that wasn't included in the requirements. But they were going to need it, and they couldn't rely on the royal guard to protect the entire estate. The princess would have her retinue with her, as she was still a royal, but their job was to protect her, not the house, the village, or the farms. But beyond that, Dominic wanted a proper military force in the estate so that they weren't one of the many villages forced to flee or die the moment that an enemy appeared. I should add another wall to the estate, or upgrade the existing one if there is one. It doesn't have to be excessive, but it should at least be defensible if the building wasn't built to repel attackers. He noted as they went through the list again. What do you mean built to repel attackers? Amos asked. The manor at home has a stone ground floor. The actual building begins 3 meters off the ground. If the stairs are collapsed, the building becomes somewhat defensible, as anyone trying to get in has to scale the wall to get in one of the windows, or through the door, which is now 3 meters in the air and unable to be rammed. Dominic explained. Lucy nodded. That used to be a common construction technique. Then the stairs were slowly upgraded to narrow ramps, and the houses became more accessible, but narrow windows that double as archer slits on the main floor are still fashionable. I don't see any actual details about the state or design of the estate manor in the paperwork. Should we ask? Amos shook his head. No, I think that is part of the trial. Coming up with a plan for whatever you find when you get there is the point of the challenge. If they tell you exactly what you're getting, it makes it too easy. They made a point of saying that it is inhabitable and that the interior was intact. But then they omitted the actual description of the manor? That can't be a coincidence. All right, we will assume that if it's not in the description, it doesn't exist or needs to be rebuilt. But Dominic can do that himself once he arrives. We just need to budget the time for the construction, as it can all be done with magic. Lucy agreed. But he will also need to upgrade that spell gem if he's going to make anything resembling a keep wall in a single pass. You can layer the walls to get what you need, but at level 1, the fieldstone wall gem is best used to make residential buildings, not fortifications. Amos explained. Dominic nodded. I can get it to level 8 easily enough. That should be sufficient to make usable fortifications, right? Amos smiled. If you're willing to put that many resources into the spell, it will be no problem for you to fortify the manor in an afternoon. It wouldn't even be unreasonable to think that you could fortify the entire village in the matter of a week. A level 8 gem would also erect standard thickness home walls fast enough that you could build a house with a wave of your hand. If we had more architectural gems and magitech, you could do the whole village like that. But right now, the best bet would be to press clay sheets into corrugated copper roofing after someone installs the roof joists. It's labor-intensive, but you can get good copper out of the spell at level 3. It's even easier than steel because it's not an alloy. Oh, you could water down river clay and let it flow into a press, then lift the press and convert it, remove the sheet and dip it again. 3 people could make a whole stack of roofing in an afternoon. Copper roofing is fire-resistant, and with fieldstone walls, the village would hold up well to artillery. Oh, that's good. I will add it to the plan. A fieldstone wall for the village wouldn't be bad either. It would keep wildlife out. You never know if there will be goblins, magical beasts, or other threats outside the village. Farmers always get the shaft when it comes to these sorts of plans, but a bit of defended territory is better than none. Oh, we can add a retreat plan to bring the farmers and others into the manor if there is a large attack. Dominic added. That means you need a larger storehouse. Starvation is a very real danger if you've got the whole village locked into a single manor. Tutor Lucy reminded him. It would help if we had some sort of layout. But it does say that the village is separated from the manor house by half a kilometer and the ground is mildly sloping. So, it won't be possible to have everything protected, as you would with a keep that had the village built around it. That means we should station most of the guards in the village, with a token force and the royal guards living in the manor. That way, neither force is too far from where they will be needed. Not optimal for a major attack, but we also don't know where we'll be. If it's somewhere inland, deep inside Signia, it's not an issue. but it could be in the reclaimed territories awarded during the armistice negotiations. So, there is a chance that everything in the area can be considered hostile. Dominic reasoned. Amos frowned. Aren't you overthinking it? I have been Baron for 30 years now, and I have never had to even consider most of this. Dominic laughed. It's a theoretical exercise to impress both the princess and the king with our capabilities and convince them both to approve our marriage proposal. Whether it would realistically happen to us or not, we need to be prepared for everything so that the princess doesn't end up as a political prisoner. The engineer laughed. I have never had to fear that. My wife is much more fearsome than I am. But someone needs to do the hard parts of life, I suppose. Chapter 162. Anti-Spying Measures. By lunch, they had found solutions to all of the obvious, and some not-so-obvious, issues. Even Baron Amos was taking notes by the time that Tutor Lucy was finished her lesson on budgeting and operating a manor and estates. Dominic wrote out a fresh copy of the plan with none of the corrections or errors that the original had, while Lucy also wrote out a copy, though for what reason, Dominic wasn't certain. Are you planning to get input from someone? He asked as she continued to write. The tutor shook her head, and a small smile added wrinkles to her face. No, I'm making up a new plan. One that's completely awful and inhumane to the residents. Leave it here on the table, and I am quite certain that by the time the reports are turned in, either spies for the royal family or one of the other competitors will have a copy. She replied, Oh, that is evil. I like it. Did it never occur to you to try to get an advantage from the ideas the others are coming up with? Amos asked. Dominic shook his head. The only one I think might come up with a better plan is Lord Thorvald, and I'm not certain that he's actually taking this process seriously. I have a suspicion that he's got a thing for Princess Josephine, and he's not actually trying to marry Princess Alexis. Lucy sipped her tea. What gives you that impression? His reaction when she slapped him. He struggles to tell the twins apart, but he was totally into it when he realized what one he was talking to. Dominic replied. The older pair looked at each other with amusement, then back at Dominic. You're sure that he's not just a masochist? He's a bit of a simpleton. Amos asked. Dominic shook his head. He's not dumb. He plays the buffoon to put people off guard. He thinks it's funny to get away with ridiculous behavior because of his reputation. He's actually the only one who noticed the little details during our meetings. Lucy frowned. If that's true, it could be problematic. The nobles who have mastered that level of subterfuge don't learn it for no reason. He's the third son of a duke in West Caria. He's got power behind him, as long as he doesn't push things so far that his father disowns him. The Marquis is a strong contender just on his own skills. But I do get the feeling that the other Signia nobles were only considered as a show to make up numbers. A younger son of a baron? Or even the spineless son of Count Herthamia? Those aren't serious contenders for the princess hand. It's really a contest between the three of you, and I'm not sure that I understand why you were chosen. I get that you have some level of royal blood in you, so you're suitable for the lineage, but even your accomplishments as a gunsmith aren't enough to elevate your status to that level. No offense. Dominic shrugged. I have suspicions, but the walls have ears. Then he wrote the words, Stantia Province, on a spare bit of paper and let the other two read it, then burn it with a create campfire spell. The tutor smiled as she realized what Dominic thought the reason was. But Baron Amos shook his head. That's a risky move, he said. Dominic nodded. It is, but I think that it's the most likely reason. Stantia Province was once Southern Wave mates. Sending Dominic back with Princess Alexis to rule a portion of the territory would give the king a way to show that he cared for the people of the region he annexed, without having to actually do anything for them. Amos looked at the uncommon, clay to steel, made pistol still sitting on the table. I don't suppose you would sell me this one for gold?
I've got plenty of that,
he asked. Dominic nodded. Of course. They were made for just that reason. I've already given them to all of Princess Alexis' royal guards. Amos laughed. No wonder you're considered the fan favorite to win. The royal guard all seems convinced that you have a secret that will give you a last-minute push ahead of the competition. But if you've been arming the royal guards, it is hardly surprising that they have a better opinion of you. Dominic chuckled. Well, with what Tutor Lucy has taught me, Plus my experience from the forge, I don't think that the guards in my hypothetical situation will be struggling to match up against any enemy that they face. Lucy shrugged. It's a compelling argument. Remember what happened in Scipia. The new king was a coward, but one of his dukes commanded enough military might to fend off an invasion, and then when he was snubbed in the post-war rewards, he married to become a prince of Floquer. He came back with an invading army, and nobody raised a blade to resist. Amos tapped the table as he counted out gold to buy the pistol from Dominic. You have a point. Military potential is a major consideration. They already lost a number of top mines to other nations this year. Losing a top gunsmith and growing sorcerer is a recipe for disaster if he holds a grudge. There is no downside to showing him favor, even if he doesn't win.
Dominic hadn't looked at it that way.
If they valued his skills and his lineage, there was no downside to giving him false hope of advancement to keep him loyal to Signia. But Dominic got the feeling that this wasn't as false of an option as the Baron thought. If the courting process was a false hope for him, there would be better competition. Dominic finished the rewrite and put both the final copy and most of the initial drafts into his storage cube. He would deliver them personally, and then he wouldn't have to worry about any sort of false accusations about his plan. At most, he would only have to wait until tomorrow morning's briefing to make the delivery, which was still a full day early. If there was a trick to be played, it would most likely come in the last few hours before the meeting, when everyone would be nearing completion of their plans. Making accusations when your opponent still had an entire day to remake their plans would not be nearly as effective, and it would only warn them that someone in their staff was compromised. Chapter 163. Prince Kaizan. Pops returned before dinner and found Dominic working in his room, with documents left sitting on the table in the main room. He moved them to the back of the table and set an empty vase on them so that they didn't blow around when he opened the window later, and then called for Dominic as the maid came in with the dinner cart. Food is ready. Give me 5 minutes. I'm just finishing up a couple of rifles for the forge's supply here, and then I will be out. Pops chuckled. The boy was excused from all his duties for the duration of the courtship trials, but he was still turning out weapons for his work quota. Very dedicated. Dominic finished enchanting a pair of rifles for the forge, uncommon grade ogre hunting rifles using level 10 oil. Having a stockpile of them here would be good for the palace, in case someone damaged another rifle. But mostly, it helped Dominic feel grounded while his mind reeled from the new information that was finally sinking in. The maid uncovered the dishes, starting with a tomato soup and fresh bread, then both a steak and a lobster tail, a plate with very decorative vegetables, and one more dish that Dominic assumed was dessert left covered on the tray. I can't tell if we're being spoiled or about to be told bad news. Pops joked. As the forge master, he ate well, but both steak and lobster in one meal was rather extravagant, as both took careful preparation to not come out wrong. They weren't dishes that were easy to make for hundreds. The maid chuckled. They're being served throughout the whole wing of the palace. I don't know what the occasion is, but the kitchen has been working hard today. Well, at least it's not just us. Perhaps they made a breakthrough, and they're going to make an announcement tonight. You should probably get ready for an emergency meeting after dinner. Pops informed Dominic. That's not a bad idea. Worst case scenario, I'm just getting an extra shower for the day. The dessert was a decadent chocolate cake, and Pops snorted in amusement when he saw it. Oh, they 100% have bad news for us. No way does this not signal bad news. Dominic scooped up a bit of cake and shrugged. Well, at least the bad news came with cake this time. It came with an emergency deployment order and no dinner last time. Dominic showered and changed as soon as they finished eating and came out of his room to see a pair of royal guards and a maid waiting for him. Advisor, there is a meeting. The maid informed him nervously. Of course. That was somewhat expected. Let's go. The walk through the halls was quiet, but they didn't lead Dominic to the princess suite. Instead, they led him to the throne room directly. The king was already seated on the throne, and one side of the room was lined with Dago's flags and dignitaries. That was not at all what Dominic was expecting when he was called. Perhaps this was the official armistice signing? He took his spot along the wall, but noticed that a pair of royal guards were stationed at his shoulders, as if already expecting trouble. Pops was right. This was definitely going to be bad news, and not a simple armistice signing. Dominic remained silent as the royals and nobles entered the throne room, with Princesses Alexis and Josephine standing in front of him, next to the red-carpeted walkway. Once everyone was in place, one final group from Dagos entered. A tall, dark-haired prince, accompanied by 4 nobles and 20 Dagos royal guards, strutted down the aisle as if this were their own palace. Signia. The prince announced with the smallest of nods in acknowledgement that he was facing the king.
Prince. Kaizen.
I trust that you are prepared to sign the armistice. King Signia asked. I am. On 2 conditions. If you want my armies to cease their inexorable advance across your pathetic nation, you will expel every Wavemates refugee from your territory and gift me 2 princesses to use as my personal slaves. The twins would be fine. He demanded. There were murmurs of discontent from the Signia side. Did this prince actually think that his side was winning the war? You think you are in a position to demand 2 of my daughters as slaves? Perhaps your losses have not been significant enough. The king asked sarcastically. Pathetic peasants and a traitor duke? Hardly a loss to the might of Dagos. 300,000 soldiers are prepared to cross the border tonight if you do not meet our demands. I see that you have not yet seen sense. You may return to your armies, Prince of Dagos. The prince smirked and turned his back on the king. Then, he drew his blade and lunged directly for Princess Alexis. A flick of his hand, and Dominic brought up an area barrier, while Princess Alexis smiled at the prince. Still too slow and too weak. Just like your armies. Now run away, little boy. Let the adults take care of politics if you don't know your place. She taunted. The royal guard had rushed to surround the Dagos delegation, and everyone had weapons drawn. Enough. The Dagos delegation will leave unharmed. The king announced. See, even your king knows his nation won't survive insulting me. Best keep your bags packed, princess. It's a long trip to your new home. The royal guard parted as Prince Kaizen departed, followed by the dignitaries sent by Dagos, who were all entirely too smug for Dominic's liking. Dominic finally noticed that there were 2 hands on his shoulders, keeping him from moving forward. Surely, they hadn't expected him to actually let the Dagos scum take Princess Alexis if the king had allowed it? No, they hadn't expected him to let it pass. That's why there were 2 guards on him. Princess, should we return to battle? Or do we have duties here in the palace? Dominic asked. Alexis winked at him, and Josephine laughed quietly. Father was right. This isn't going to end without more bloodshed. Dagos aren't willing to accept that they've lost, even with so much territory in our hands. Alexis whispered. Chapter 164. Impasse. The king pounded his hand on the throne, bringing the room to silence as the doors closed behind the Dagos delegation. We have come to an impasse in the armistice negotiations. The demands that have been made are not acceptable by either side, and the representative of the royal family of Dagos is not convinced that they are actually going to lose the war. So, today we begin the offensive phase of the battle. The airships have been prepared, the mechanized cavalry is ready, and our battle mages have been positioned for the assault. Unit assignments for the royal family will be delivered by my personal staff tonight. The 6th prince and his unit will escort Prince Kaizen back across the border, as his safety was guaranteed under the terms of the ceasefire. The king explained. He stood and left the room, the signal for everyone else to break up and prepare. Dominic followed Princess Alexis back to her suite, where a royal advisor was waiting for them. Your Highness, this is for you, he declared, as he passed over the small note. Alexis took the note with her as she entered the suite, then waved her hand for everyone but Dominic to leave. Let's see how bad this is. We found out today that Dagos has an alliance with Skipple on their western border. The 2 nations have fielded an army of nearly 1 million men who are currently making their way across Dagos on the main roads. That will lead them near the staging point for the last attack at Staptentave. It is also the only route that their vehicles can take, as they are not built for cross-country travel. She explained, then opened the royal missive. Dearest daughter, the future king apparent of Dagos is serious about his demands. He will accept nothing less than the public humiliation of our family in return for the armistice. If this war ends anyway except with their utter capitulation, I fear that your freedom cannot be guaranteed. As such, I have put the natural sons at your disposal, and you have free rein to plan your own battles. Accept no defeat, never surrender, or face a fate worse than death. Father, I knew that I should have killed him, Dominic muttered. Princess Alexis shook her head and brought every border nation down upon us for killing an envoy under the flag of peace. No, it's better that you didn't. At least not today. Don't forget that Mitfield and West Kyria had nobles in the room for that meeting. But I have a plan. Do you have a way in your techno-magic knowledge to set up mobile artillery quickly and lightweight enough that it won't overload a storage item? Give me a night, and I think that I can come up with something. Dominic agreed. Then we will leave at first light. The riflemen are already being prepared to move. Dominic nodded and prepared to return to his rooms. No, you're remaining here for the night. We're not having another incident like the assassination attempts. If you need tools, we will send someone to get them. Alexis ordered. I will need to make the launchers later then. This suite isn't suitable for metalworking. But the idea I have is for shorter range artillery. 1 to 200 meters maximum, but man-portable and quick loading. Dominic explained. And how did you come up with that so quickly? Dominic smiled. I didn't. It came up as an option earlier when we were thinking of ideas for another issue. Fireworks launcher tubes. Only, instead of fireworks, we put a fragmentation grenade with a fuse on the end. A mortar shell. It's shaped like an oval tackle ball, but with fins at the back to stabilize it. Drop it in the tube like a firework. But don't aim it straight up. Princess Alexis relaxed a little and smiled. And you can launch them across the city. The kids in the Noble District do it with fireworks every year. I suppose that it would be much more deadly with a grenade than a sparkler in the tube. The next thing that Dominic needed to do was modify and build a new version of the Create Munitions Magitech orb. One that would make the mortar rounds. They weren't that different from cannonballs, and they were much smaller, so it was only a small adaptation to this self-loading cannon orb. In under 2 hours, he had a new one made, and he had successfully created the first batch of mortar rounds, though he hadn't been able to test them. Are you sure that those will be deadly enough? Alexis asked. If they land on a city wall or within infantry, certainly. If they hit a house, it's less likely. What were you planning? Dominic asked. Hit and run cavalry rifleman tactics. If we take a few all-terrain trucks with the riflemen, we can get anywhere we need to be quickly. Leave the trucks further back, send the cavalry forward, bombard Dago's camps when they are settled in, and then retreat if possible. I want to inflict as many casualties on their infantry as possible so that there won't be enough men for them to continue their war effort. Dominic nodded. In that case, we will need a lot of the mortar launchers. I will try to get one made for everyone in the Natural Sons. Even 3 or 4 volleys from 500 cavalrymen will be enough to cause utter chaos in a camp. But I will warn you, these are not precisely aimed weapons. You pick a field to target and hope they land on it. Alexis nodded. We will take what we can get. The Natural Sons are competent riflemen. Even if the first strike isn't successful, they should still be able to inflict heavy casualties on the enemy. But we will be doing it deep within Dagos, so don't expect any sympathy from the locals. Dominic nodded. If we had more time, I would work on improved gear, but as it is, I will just grab every bit of spare tooling and parts for the weapons they have. I can make more along the way if necessary. You know, when we get back after the war, we're going to have a lot to answer for, right? Alexis asked, unsure if Dominic understood the many violations of the rules of war that a surprise mortar bombardment of sleeping troops entailed. In that case, we should likely leave the royal heraldry behind when we depart. Chapter 165, Departure. Dominic made 4 of the modified orbs before bed that night, and then prepared to leave first thing in the morning. Should we try to come up with some sort of cover for our departure? Princess Alexis asked nervously as she packed her supplies into her storage rings. Not a bad idea. The king knows, but nobody else does. I will leave a note. Dominic agreed. Pops, given the current situation and the demands of the Dagos prince, which will surely be the gossip of the palace by the time that you receive this, I have decided to elope with the princess. Please inform her father that I would ask for his forgiveness when you see him. Or don't. That's probably safer. Dominic. Then he wrote Pops on the outside and sealed it with his thumb pressed in hot wax. Alexis donned the same disguise that she had the last time that they snuck out and gave Colonel Wilkes an affectionate thump on the armor as she left her suite. The royal guard wouldn't be with them this time, as it would draw too much attention, both leaving the palace and when Dago's citizens saw them in combat. The laws of both nations required that the royal guard not fight while out of uniform, so they simply couldn't accompany the princess without causing a spectacle. They made it to the staging area, where the princess climbed into a supply wagon and Dominic took a seat next to her. The guards will go out training in 5 minutes, with Ella from my royal guard retinue dressed in my armor. That should be enough to distract any spies, as long as her visor isn't flipped up during training. 1 day to get out of town is all that we can ask for before Dago's will have spies hunting for me and Josephine. Alexis explained. The convoy started moving, and Dominic settled in for the trip. He wouldn't be able to work until they were out of the city, or the smoke from the forge and the sound of hammering would give them away. But the Natural Sons Regiment would be the primary suspect in Princess Alexis' disappearance the moment that she was discovered to be missing. They were assigned to her, and even if she hadn't officially left with them on this mission, someone would be sure to come looking. The convoy moved smoothly out of the city, and then northwest along the dirt roads between fields and farms, headed directly toward the border, as would be expected of a military deployment. We've got a full morning of travel, and then we will be in the thick woods on the other side of Eremos village. From there, we can strip the insignia and move like a private military force belonging to one of the nobles. It's normal for them not to fly banners out of combat, so nobody should question it too deeply. The driver explained, leaning toward the window, so Dominic could hear him. Got it. Let me know when you change. The princess surely has something prepared, but I was intending to be somewhat flamboyant. Every good mercenary force needs a visible employer. I've got enough fancy clothing to pull it off for at least a few days until we reach the border. Dominic explained. Just keep your hat on. The driver agreed. Nobody even looked up as another convoy of Signia soldiers moved back toward the border. News was already spreading that Dago's had refused the terms of the armistice, and the war was likely to begin again any day. Whether that meant that Dago's would strike again with underhanded tactics like the goblin invasions, nobody knew. As they passed Eremos village, the driver knocked on the carriage roof to let Dominic know that something was wrong. Do you need me to come up? He asked. And put on your best act. The driver agreed. Dominic put on one of the flat caps he had gotten with his new, rakish Playboy fashion and added a pair of crystal lens goggles, as was fashionable in the city. Then he climbed out onto the running boards and up beside the driver. Who is leading this force? A deep voice was shouting from the front. I am. Why are you blocking our way? Dominic shouted back. A knock at the window behind the driver caught his attention, and Dominic took a rolled scroll from Alexis. A cursory glance showed that they were deployment orders, and she had filled in the Earl of Topbu as the unit's commander. The Earl of Topbu was long dead, with no heirs that Dominic knew of. But most would just assume that the title had been given to someone else as a reward for service. Who are you, then? The captain of the team blocking the road demanded. Earl Nick of Topbu. I had deployment orders from His Majesty. Now, why are you blocking my unit? Dominic demanded, holding up the scroll, with the royal seal visible. Then he rolled it before the captain would have time to fully read anything. Our apologies, Earl Topbu. We have been alerted that a member of the royal family is missing, and we have been ordered to secure all roadways. The captain explained. Understandable. Missing children are always an urgent matter. However, there are none in my convoy, and we are urgently needed at the front. Dominic replied. Of course, my lord. However, we do need to search the carriages. Dominic frowned. Are you questioning my word or my honor? Of course not, my lord. Please proceed. We will mark the search as performed by yourself personally. Dominic nodded and gestured for the cavalry to move, even if they had to run over the blockade soldiers. 30 minutes later, They were sure that the area was abandoned enough to take down all their heraldry, and the Royal Army unit became a personal cavalry force of the Earl of Topbu. Then, Princess Alexis came out with her hair dyed black and a much less ornate set of armor on. Her cloak was light, suitable for the weather, but hooded to keep her face out of the sun. That made her look like one of the guards, or perhaps a ranking servant of the Earl. Perhaps even the Countess. She was the only woman in the procession, as while the recruitment was open to everyone, the Natural Children's Initiative had only attracted younger sons, earning it the moniker the Natural Sons Regiment. Keep going. Let's get as far as possible toward the border before we have to stop, Dominic instructed. Chapter 166. Traveling Incognito. Well after dark, the convoy pulled to the side of the road in an open clearing, and Commander Dax came back to the truck Dominic and Alexis were riding in. My lady, we have an issue. Our cover requires that we operate as a unit under the command of a lord. But nobody thought about where you would fit into that cover. We just assumed that someone else had, and it slipped our mind.
He whispered.
Meaning, you'll either have to sleep in the transport carriage with our supposed Earl, or we will have to explain to anyone who happens upon us why the Lord is sleeping in the dirt with the common soldiers. Dax mumbled. The road was a busy one, and they had only just managed to remove all their heraldry before the next group came down the road in the opposite direction, bringing farm supplies to market. Alexis smiled at the commander. Fear not. We can manage this level of disguise. Think of it as the Lord Sorcerer auditioning for his role as fiancé. Commander Dax choked on his next words, then stiffly saluted. Understood. I will. Leave you to your evening preparations. He closed the door of the passenger compartment, and Alexis laughed. This is destined to be an interesting trip. Either we come back victorious, or both of our reputations will be ruined, and we will be cast out of the social circles of the upper nobility entirely. She joked. Dominic chuckled. Well, if we are, I know a nice spot in the woods where we could move and nobody would ever know our names. The princess shook her head in dismay, then turned her back. Help me with this, would you? Noble women's clothing is not intended to be put on or removed by one person. Well, neither is armor. But we don't have any staff with us for that purpose on this outing. Dominic smiled as he undid the knot in her corset laces. You know, there is a method to this for commoner women without maids. If you take all this extra lacing, and instead of running it back up the row, you loop it around the front, you can tie yourself off, and everything will stay tight. Normally, a commoner housewife would be wearing an apron all day, so the laces are covered. I learned all about it from my mother when I grabbed and untied the lace as a kid. But for the sake of appearances, it's better that I lace you up. We wouldn't want people thinking that my wife couldn't afford to be dressed properly. He joked. Once the lacing was loose, Dominic helped her out of the garment, then did his very best not to react as she let the dress fall, revealing her slip dress, which was simple cotton and easily removed without assistance. She held out her hand, and Dominic handed her the nightgown on the bench. Then, Alexis realized that it was Dominic in here with her, and not her dressing maids. Forget that you saw that. I'm quite certain that is not possible. However, I can refrain from mentioning it. Alexis rolled her eyes and turned him around before she removed the slip and lowered the nightgown over her head. Then she smirked at Dominic. Aren't you going to get ready for bed? She asked in a taunting voice. Dominic sat on the bench and stripped off his shirt, then began to unbutton his pants before Alexis turned away with flaming red cheeks. A pair of soft flannel pants replaced the day wear, and he was ready for sleep. I will fold this so it doesn't wrinkle. The back bench folds out into a bed, and I will get the blankets out from under it when I shift the seat. He offered. Yes, excellent. Thank you. Alexis stammered. Dominic made the bed, and Alexis motioned for him to take the back. If anyone breaks into the truck, put up a barrier and eliminate them with magic. My hair is dyed black, but if they get a good look at me, there is a good chance that someone will recognize me and report it back to their boss. She explained. Got it. Sleep was not an easy task that night, at least for Dominic. Especially not as the sleeping position she had chosen made her the little spoon as he lay facing the door, so he could react to intruders. Princess Alexis was asleep within seconds of her head hitting the pillow, but Dominic was keenly aware of her sleeping next to him, and the journey to sleep seemed to take forever. So, when he woke up, it was almost a relief to know that he had actually managed to rest at some point. He carefully stepped over the princess and began to get dressed, putting on his armor, then reconsidering trying to fit clothes over chainmail so he could look more noble. He didn't have any fancy clothing fitted for that, like most nobles would. Instead, he put on sorcerer robes with his chest plate over them and one of the ornate top hats that had been included in the purchase of formal clothing he made for the effort to court the princess. Paired with a set of goggles as a hat band, he made a perfectly disjointed image of a tech-obsessed noble mage. It would have to do. Then, he woke Alexis and got her fully dressed and armored. All right, we look like a proper earl and countess. Now, let's go see what the regiment has for breakfast and get on the road again. The answer was oatmeal and dried fruit. Not fancy, but filling. The regiment pushed hard through the day, as the trucks had Magitech boilers and the horses were all mechanical, not needing to stop for rest. The riders did, but stretching and preventing saddle sores took less time than letting a winded horse rest and eat. That efficiency got them into the regions where the major battles between Dagos and Signia had occurred before nightfall. Everything from here forward can be considered hostile territory, and we won't get much radio contact out here for obvious reasons. Commander Dax reminded them. Of course. Did you have a spot in mind to rest for the evening? Dominic asked. There is a village not far from here. A nameless cluster of farmhouses. They were shelled by artillery when Dago's soldiers holed up in them. There isn't much left, but it will block the wind, and we might be able to sleep inside. He reported. That works. Nobody likes to sleep in the dirt when they could toss a soft pad on the floor of a farmhouse. Chapter 167. Mortars prepared. The village was little more than ruins at this point, but it had been made of stone buildings, so there were at least walls to keep the wind down as the soldiers found places to sleep. It was early, which allowed Dominic a few hours to get some work done. He had a wooden post the size of the grenades and large blocks of clay in his storage cube. If he pressed the clay over the post, then added a pair of support legs and a base plate before activating clay to copper, he could make the launching tubes in a matter of minutes. The outsides weren't pretty, and the thickness wasn't perfectly uniform. But they weren't as high pressure of a barrel as the rifles were, just an aiming tube for the mortar grenades. He assembled 20 of them for the evening, and then went looking for Commander Dax. I have mortar tubes and grenades for the team. I haven't tested the orb that made the grenades yet, but they should work. Don't mind the outside. The inside of the tubes is perfectly smooth. The commander chuckled, then examined the mortar launcher. That should be good enough, and the finger holds on the tube will make it easier to carry, even if they weren't intentional. I don't want to test it tonight, but if we find an enemy tomorrow, we will test them quickly during the battle. If they work, we can deploy more of them. There are more of them, aren't there? 20 mortar launchers is pretty good, but the enemy is already in rifle range when we can start using them. So, they're best for a surprise explosive wake-up, followed by a rifle barrage. Dominic nodded. Good, we're on the same page. I will make more tomorrow if I can. I'm low on clay for the clay to copper spell. I need to keep some for spare parts on the rifles. It might not be as ammunition-intensive as defending a siege, but I expect that your rifles are going to take a beating over the course of the war. The commander chuckled. Oh, we certainly plan on it. The question is whether everyone has the stomach for what needs to be done. I don't think that most of our men are up for the sort of thing that Dagos did to wavemates. Burning farm villages is a big thing to ask the noblemen of Signia. Dominic patted him on the shoulder. Fear not. Our plans involve targeting military convoys, setting ambushes, and crippling supply lines. It's not about how many we kill, but how much chaos we cause without getting caught. Dominic returned to the truck and found Alexis waiting for him to unlace her so they could sleep. This is all horribly inconvenient. Maybe I should be the one wearing sorcerer's robes. She joked. They're actually quite comfortable. But when it comes to sword fighting, they're not the best. They're not fitted tightly enough, the skirts have no slit for movement, and the sleeves would get in the way. Just think of this as me taking on a trial run for husbandly duties. Dominic replied with a wink. You don't seem at all concerned about the letter from my father. Did it not occur to you to run? She asked as Dominic helped her out of her dress. If Dagos wins, there will be no safe place for me on this side of the continent. Every other nation will fall in line with their demands that all Wavemates refugees be expelled or killed. They have already named me personally as a war criminal, so I doubt that expulsion is going to be an option if I'm caught. Besides, did you really think that I would leave you alone and on the run to avoid that pervert prince? He doesn't even deserve to stand in your presence. Alexis smiled. Letting him read romance novels over her shoulder might have been a mistake. He was becoming entirely too smooth with his lines. They settled in for the night in the carriage, but their relief was short-lived. A soft knock at the door woke them both well before first light. Master Dominic, our scouts have spotted a target. I believe that Dagos sent someone to follow us as we left the city. One of the soldiers whispered. Is it late enough to wake everyone? Alexis replied. It is 3 a.m, PR. Mississippi prime time for a night raid, and it appears that they have ridden through the night to launch one. The soldier replied. Keeping up the disguise as an earl and countess was not going to be easy on the regiment. Etiquette was too ingrained in them. Prepare the mortars in defensive positions. Keep them hidden under the tents. Do not let the enemy know that we are onto them until they are in mortar range, but get the entire regiment ready for battle. Dominic instructed. Very good, sir. Dominic and Alexis dressed quickly, preparing for battle. Who had followed them, and how, was a mystery. But if they didn't leave any survivors, there was a good chance that they could escape deeper into Dagos without any more Dagos units in pursuit. Alexis frowned as they prepared for battle, sharpening blades and double-checking rifles. If they're truly tracking us and suspect that I am with the convoy, their commander is going to report back when I am identified. She whispered. Then it's a good thing that he is about to suffer from a battlefield accident. I will put someone on it during the first volley. Dominic replied. If he's an upper noble, he's supposed to be captured and ransomed. She replied. Only if they survive. Duke Albrols had a most unfortunate battlefield accident as well. We didn't even know that he was personally on the battlefield, and cannon fire doesn't discriminate. Dominic shrugged. Alexis gritted her teeth. You are right. I was being too kind to them, even at the risk that they would call for reinforcements. That's the spirit. Under the watchful eyes of the gods and an artillery battery, all men are created equal. Alexis smiled at him. If I didn't know that you just made that up on the spot, it would sound like sage advice from the elders. Chapter 168. Night Raid. The Dagos army scouts tailing them certainly thought that they were sneaky, Dominic decided. They didn't realize that the Signia scouts had Magitech scopes to see in the dark. So, the invaders were still crouched low to the ground, blades at the ready, as they approached the village. 200 meters. 175. Begin bombardment. Commander Dax ordered. The mortar rounds made a sizzling whistle as they launched, the same as a flare or a firework. But nobody was waiting to see where they landed before they loaded more rounds and continued the bombardment. Dozens of explosions rippled across the field over the next 30 seconds, with some landing less than half the distance to the enemy, from launchers that were set at an angle instead of flat. But the effect was everything that they could have hoped for. When the explosion started, they lit up the battlefield at the enemy's position, allowing the riflemen to begin firing. They also made the enemy stand and charge their position, making themselves larger targets. Rifles fired, and soldiers fell. But Dominic didn't see the enemy commander on the battlefield. Stay out of sight. Don't let them confirm whether there is even a single female in the convoy. The commander isn't here, and he will run when he realizes that they have lost. Dominic whispered to Alexis as he drew his pistol and waited for the Dagos soldiers to get close enough for him to join the battle. Then Dominic wrapped his cloak over himself and pulled the hood up. He could see much better in the dark than anyone else he had met. Far better than even his parents. So, he went hunting for the enemy's commander. In the chaos of the battle, one black-cloaked figure sneaking out of the far side of the village didn't attract any attention, and it didn't take Dominic long to find the vehicle convoy they had left a little over a kilometer away, on the far side of a hill. No wonder the scouts had spotted them. They were all morons. But the commander was definitely there, standing in front of the headlights of his truck and looking at a document of some sort. Dominic counted 4 other men with him, most likely the drivers of the trucks, as they weren't gathered near him to give advice. That gave him an easy opportunity. He might not be a skilled sniper, but the trucks still gurgled and hissed as they vented steam at idle, and the fires in the burners crackled softly as the coal burned. If this was the best that Dagos had to offer, they were never going to catch the princess. Dominic crawled through the long grass and then followed a low hedge beside the road until he was within 20 meters of the trucks. Dominic made a warding gesture for good luck, a habit from his childhood. Then he rushed out of the bushes and within 5 paces of the Dagos noble. His left hand flickered back and forth, repeatedly cocking the pistol as he fired. Then he reloaded and put 6 more rounds into the downed noble before reloading a second time and turning on the drivers. They seemed so shocked to see someone in their midst that they weren't even charging, just looking around with their swords in their hands. Dominic fired from the other side of the trucks, taking the 4 men down before he realized the issue. He was standing on the other side of the headlights of the vehicle closest to them, so none of the drivers could see a thing past the bright light. A rookie mistake, and not one that Dominic would have expected from professional soldiers. So, he fired a round into each of the 4 vehicle cargo areas and then waited to see if there was any movement. Nothing. Carefully, he opened the doors, expecting an ambush at any moment. The vehicles were empty except for crates and backpacks, the standard supplies of a traveling convoy. Dominic pulled a crate from the lead vehicle and swung it open, revealing brightly colored clothing, fit for a high noble. There was a small bag of Dagos gold coins in the chest, and a badge of office that Dominic didn't recognize. It wasn't from Signia, though. He threw the whole chest in his storage cube, then everything else that looked like it might hold valuables. After that, he went through the pockets of the dead drivers, liberating them of their coin purses. The final touch was to steal the hat and boots from the noble, as his jacket was ruined with bullet holes. It would look to the world like he had been ambushed by bandits. After all, what self-respecting soldier would steal a dead man's boots? They were nice boots, though. The battle was ending, and the mortars had stopped. They let Dominic return down the road, where the attackers had approached. Body after body, he looted the Dagos noble's guards dry before returning to the natural sons. Finish looting all the bodies clean. Let the next group to come along clean up the mess. It's not going to be a secret for long that these guardsmen ran afoul of bandits while rushing about like fools in the dark. Use the mana pistols to double-check that there are no survivors. No need to waste ammunition. Dominic instructed. Mana pistols were much quieter than the rifles, and nobody wanted to be reminded of the grim business of ensuring that there were no more spies following them. Sir, we found something that you might find interesting. One of the soldiers informed Dominic, but he handed the paper directly to Alexis. Alexis sighed as she read the letter. It's a letter from Prince Kaizan to an unnamed retainer. They're supposed to eliminate the regiment and bring me alive to the prince if I'm with them. It doesn't go into details, but it sounds like there are multiple teams. Each of them must be following a team that left the city, searching for me. So, he's determined to get to you. Do we know where Josephine is? Dominic asked. Alexis smiled. She's commanding the Signia City Guard. She's still in the palace and will be quite visible. That's a danger of its own, but it will be much harder to abduct her, assuming he wants us both alive. Chapter 169. Raid failed. Dominic handed the princess the badge of office that he had gathered from the trucks. This was in the commander's gear. It looks like they diverted one of their nobles, who was returning with his retinue. Or private army, whatever you want to call a traveling military force of this size. He explained. 500 men was not a small force, any way that you looked at it. The badge is a Dagos royal commission. It doesn't tell us who the noble was, only that they were acting under royal protection and approval. But that is a valuable item to find. Normally, they are intended to self-destruct when the person wearing them or the storage item they are in dies. She explained. It wasn't in his storage item. It was in a trunk in the vehicle he was riding in. Alexis nodded. Good news for us. Now we've got a royal commission to flash at people when we run into a tight situation. We surely will one day, when we don't make a smooth escape after an ambush. Lady A, we're bringing the vehicles forward, to make it appear that they were ambushed here, and not away from their vehicles. That should sell the appearance that it was bandits or deserters who attacked them. Once that is done, we will move out. What is our next target? Commander Dax asked. The Tun Springs, as the headwater of the Tun River. Our last update says that there are 5 small armies headed towards Signia from that direction. Each is fewer than 2,000 men. If we can hit them, we can cut down on the number of raiding armies that will threaten our border barons. Alexis explained. Understood. We will send out scouts right away. If they've been moving for 2 days, some of their mechanized forces might be close to us by now. Dax agreed. It was about 500 kilometers to the town of the Tun River, with very minimally maintained farm roads. Plus, they were in the rainy season, so moving across open country in the less capable Dago's design trucks wouldn't be easy. The Signia design trucks would be a warning to anyone who saw their convoy that they weren't locals, but they couldn't afford to swap them for trucks that would constantly get stuck and break down. In the distance, Dominic heard the sound of vehicles and sighed. You had to go and say it. We've got mechanized forces to the north. We need to move now. He explained. Everyone into the woods. Pack everything. Leave no sign we were here. Dax shouted. The Dago's trucks were just dropped off as the rest of the unit started moving east, hiding on the far side of a small patch of trees. If that force is small, should we try to hit it? Dax asked. Dominic shook his head. Only if we get the perfect opportunity. We aren't going to get supplies or reinforcements, so we can't afford to lose anyone on the first day. They rushed away, unable to hide their tracks across the grasslands. If the army wanted to find them, it would. But the woods were only 50 meters deep, just enough to hide them from sight. If they stayed near the back side of them, they could fire mortars over until they ran out, then deal with the survivors when they came through or around the trees. The scouts spread out, keeping watch for the approach of the enemy. They were coming, but they were following a road further west of where the destroyed village had been. 2 tense hours later, the all-clear signal was given. The army hadn't stopped to check out the parked vehicles, and had simply assumed that the Dago's heraldry on the sides meant that they were friendly. They might have reported it to someone else, but the army was under orders to advance, and they weren't going to go off course just to check out such a small group of vehicles. There was no way that they could know that hundreds of infantrymen had been accompanying them the day before. Let's head north, get behind the army's movement if we can, and find a good spot to set up ambushes when we spot more units on the move. Alexis directed. They might have the edge with their new artillery, but most of the military units that they were going to encounter would be much larger than their own, and they couldn't afford to make mistakes while they were in enemy territory. It didn't take them long to find both the perfect spot and a Dago's army unit to ambush in it. Scouts report that they have eliminated 6 enemy forward observers. There is a defensible position within the trees to the east, an old keep wall still standing. Dax reported. All right, alter course. Let's get into cover and lure in the enemy. Dominic agreed. They're already on it. Getting the trucks through the overgrown area and into the ruins of the keep was not easy, but Signia had adapted their trucks from either mail carriages or farm tractors, both of which were exceptionally capable on rough terrain. In this case, they were all based on tractors, and as long as a single wheel could find traction, they would keep moving. Blankets were tossed over the boilers to silence them and keep the heat in while they rested, reducing the mana needed to get them back up to temperature when it was time to leave. They have spotted the scouts, and they're in pursuit. 2,000 meters and closing fast. Commander Dax reported. Riflemen to the tree line. Lay flat in cover. Wait for the signal to shoot. Mortars, set up on the wall. I have munitions for you all. Dominic instructed. The wall was 60 meters from the tree line, well short of where the closest of misfired mortars had landed last time. But with that incident for practice, the riflemen would be better this time. They're stopping short of the trees. 400 meters. They are deploying archers with the infantry. The observer reported. Dominic quickly altered a fresh batch of the mortars for a longer fuse and more propellant. Use only these until they get closer. They're set for 300 to 400 meters. Dominic explained. They're forming ranks. Phalanx formation in front of the archers.
Fire.
The mortars whistled, and the launchers thumped down into the dirt as they fired, while the 20 men began loading them every few seconds, letting the mortars fly and praying that the distances were correct. Explosions shook the battlefield, small at first, then a chain of larger detonations. Direct mortar strike on a powder wagon. 70% accuracy on the archer ranks. 90% of mortars are on target to the unit. The infantry is charging the trees. Switch rounds. Shell the infantry and break the phalanx. Alexis ordered as Dominic made and passed out more rounds. Now that the infantry was moving, the rifles were working overtime, cutting down as many as they could. Then, the first few mortars bounced off shields and fell among the infantry before detonating. The phalanx crumbled from within, and the front rank collapsed to the rifles as the mortars continued to fire. "They are retreating," the observer reported. The rifles continued to fire for a few more minutes, and then a triple-tone whistle from the tree line stopped the fire. "Revolvers out, get what we can, and let's get out of here," Commander Dax ordered. Chapter 170. Sweep and Move. The sweep was fast, with sporadic pistol fire as they moved through the defeated infantry. The detonation of the powder wagon had destroyed most of the enemy forces' supplies, but the unit managed to come back with what looked like an entire truck worth of field rations. They were only 2 days out of the palace, so they didn't have a lot of room, but all the crates were quickly strapped to the outside or roof of the trucks, and they were moving again, headed inland. The survivors went straight west. "They're unlikely to come across the first battlefield, but we looted this one as well," Commander Dax reported. "Excellent work. Let's find a safe spot to sleep for the night, and let the Dago's army wonder why their team isn't reporting in." Alexis agreed. "Aren't they just too poorly armed?" Dominic asked as they moved out of the ruins, looking for somewhere as good that wasn't next to a fresh battlefield. Alexis shrugged. "They're traditionally armed. I don't think that Dagos can actually afford to supply them all with magitech, so they're sending them as heavy infantry, like they did 100 years ago. It worked well enough then, and for the most part it will work now. But not against riflemen." 1,000 kilometers to their southwest, stopped at Staptentave, just inside the Dagos borders, Prince Kaizan was fuming. The unit that he had sent to find Princess Alexis had been massacred, and the tracking spell which should have been triggered when her location was verified had never been used. What the hell had they run into inside their own borders? None of the other surviving princes were going to go down easily, and if he didn't get this tie to the Signia royalty before they conquered the nation, he would have to deal with mass rebellions when his people were already starving. Worse, every village that they managed to raid along the Signia border had either destroyed the techno-wizard shop before the village fell, or the damnable magicians had retreated before he even arrived. They had nothing to show for their raids, and they still didn't understand how the Signia airships could have both a speed and altitude advantage on the designs that they had paid so much to acquire from West Kyria. The paratrooper technique had worked brilliantly at first, but now Signia was adapting to it. But Kaizan didn't really care about that. It had served its purpose, and all that he had to do now was capture his wayward concubine before he conquered her nation. In his mind, it was just that simple. If he wanted things done right, he was going to have to do them himself. Dispatch the royal guard to hunt down the war criminal and the concubine. I want both alive if possible, but I won't be too upset if the sorcerer is dead. Just ensure that he does not escape. I don't know what gold-blinded traitor told West Kyria, but word is spreading that a prince of Wavemates has survived, and if they can get their hands on him, those Kyrian bastards are sure to use it as an excuse to raise an army against us while we're mired in Signia. The prince ordered his advisor. "It will be done, Your Highness." Deep in the woods near the village of the Tun River, the Natural Sons had found an abandoned trading post, defunct since a flood 80 years ago had changed the course of the river. There was no sign of habitation after that, and even the closest farms were near the horizon. It looked to the casual eye as if the nation were actually losing population, but they were actually undergoing industrialization, and the people were flocking to the city chasing the promise of jobs that paid more than subsistence. Whether they actually did or not was questionable, and the quality of life in the coal smoke and filth of the Dagos major cities was not much better than struggling to keep a garden in the wilderness. But to the struggling youth of the rural areas, the dream of a better life shone far brighter than the reality of the cities. Droughts had been a constant companion for most of a decade, and for the majority of the farmers, tax levies were taking the subsistence out of subsistence farming. Commander, send someone to scout the farm village. Give them one of the Dago's ration crates, in case they need help getting people to talk. Don't take the mechanical horses into town, leave them with the scouts, and keep the team under 3 men. Alexis ordered. Understood. They will get the information that we need. Dax agreed. She would have preferred to go herself, but with the prince searching for them, the chance that either her or Dominic would be recognized was too high. Anonymity was a form of safety, and until they could no longer keep it up, she knew that her best bet was to keep her head down. Dominic was in the same situation. Even if they weren't looking for him specifically, it was a death penalty for a sorcerer to even be in Dago's uninvited. Going in to scout for himself was far too risky. An hour later, the sun was nearly setting, and Commander Dax approached the village's lone inn. Stranger, what can we do for you? The innkeeper asked. I don't suppose that you've got drink? You see, my friends and I are working in the area, and I've built up a mighty thirst. He asked. The commander was a handsome young man, every bit the playboy young noble that the Natural Sons Regiment had been looking for. The innkeeper nodded. The Baron taxes any money he finds in our hands, so we are a barter-only establishment. Dax smiled and set out a kilo of cured ham from the Dago's military rations. It was clearly bagged for military use, a calculated risk on his part. The innkeeper smiled and moved the ham beneath the counter, then poured an ale for the young noble. That should cover you for the evening. If your band of caring gents should happen to come across more of the same, let me know, and can work a way to pay you for them. The crops haven't been good lately, and we're still a few weeks from planting season when the rains slow. He whispered. Dax winked at him. If we are able to remain in the area, we will have plenty to trade. I hope you like barley. The gentleman we met along the highway donated it to us in 50-kilo sacks. In that case, I don't suppose that it's been a lonely trip? My Lydia is widowed, but she's a kindly sort. The innkeeper offered. Tempting, but Dax had work to do. Perhaps the next time that I visit. My friends and I just needed to make sure that your village was made of good and pious sorts, not those warmongering pompous Westerners. The innkeeper nodded. There are more than enough of those around. They've set up a recruitment and training facility northwest of here. Best steer clear. They've taken every boy between 12 and 20 for the army, and far too many of the girls as well.